Do close power lines decrease the value of a property? All right, guys, let's talk all about power lines. There's a couple of things you need to realize with power lines is power lines put off what's called an electric magnetic field, also called EMF. With these, you can actually measure the amount of EMF or electronic magnetic field that the lines actually put out. You can typically call the power company and have them do it, or you can buy a device yourself to measure how much EMF is actually going on. Now, that may have a bearing on your decision whether you should buy a property that is by power lines or not as far as a safety. Now, there's been all kinds of studies that have been done when it comes to power lines. Some of them have said it's horrible. Some of them have said it's no problem. I don't think that there's anything scientifically where they're saying, yes, this is a problem. And I think one of the reasons is that power lines are different and they put off a different EMF depending upon where the power lines are located, what they go through, how big they are, all those different types of things. To answer the real question here is, does it decrease the value of the property? And the answer is yes, it does. But here's the thing, it depends on what you're comparing it to. If you have a property with power lines and your comparable is a few doors down and has power lines running over it, those are good comparables, and I wouldn't see it decreasing the value more than what that property has sold for. But if you take a property that has power lines and you go a mile over and find a property that's not even close to power lines, that is not going to be a good comparable. So when you say decrease the value, it really comes down to comparables and what you're comparing it against. The same house on one side of the tracks versus the other side of the tracks could be completely different values. When we value a property, we look within a 1 mile range, and we're looking for properties that have sold in the last year. The sooner they've sold, the better, and the closer to the property it is, the better it is. So if we want to know what this property is really worth, we need to find comparables that have property lines running right on top of them that are really close to the property. If we're unable to find those properties, then we're using a property that doesn't have power lines going through it, and we have to do what's called an adjustment. The hard thing about this is the type of adjustment that needs to be made is really, really difficult to understand. The question is, how much less will you have to sell the property so somebody would be willing to live underneath the power lines? And that's a very difficult thing, because part of the population may say, that's a problem, I won't live there no matter what. Some of the population may want to do the test and see what the EMF is, and some of the population may think it's not that big of a deal, but they're going to want a big discount in order to do that. A perfect example of this that I've dealt with was my Burger King house. You've probably heard me talk about it before, but I bought a house that was a few doors down from a Burger King. I didn't think it was that big of a deal because I wasn't directly across from it. I was a few doors down, and being naive and early in my real estate investing career, I overlooked it and said it's really not going to make that big of a difference. What I didn't realize is when you have the neon lights of Burger King and you're trying to sit on your front porch, or when you're smelling them grilling Whoppers at 9 a.m. when you're leaving from work, that has an impact. I ended up having to sell the property for a lot less than I thought. Now, the comps would tell me I should have sold the property for more money, but the Burger King effect of having that Burger King a few doors down from me made an impact on what a willing buyer was willing to pay for the property because of the disadvantage they would have of having the neon lights at night and having the burgers smell early in the morning. This is the same type of thing we're dealing with when we're dealing with power lines. To really know what the property is going to be worth, you've got to have a comparable that's really close, that's in the power lines, that's recently sold. If you don't have that, you're taking on a big amount of risk because you're going to have to make a deduction. Now, what type of deduction should you be making for power lines? I've seen deductions anywhere from 10% to 40%, but keep in mind the deduction you're giving it is a guess as to what somebody else would be willing to pay for it, and that obviously increases your risk. Maybe you were looking to buy this property and use it as a rental property. You'll also have some challenges in renting the property as well because less people will be interested, especially when you deal with this EMF factor. Even if you're getting it tested or anything else, some people say, I just don't want to live under the power lines. For the right price, somebody is going to be willing to live under the power lines, whether it's a rental or whether it's a sale. The hard thing about this is guessing as to what price that needs to be. pay. I would much rather know what that is. In the end here, I would say if you've got comparables that are under the power lines that have recently sold and active properties and there's market activity and you've seen things selling, you're probably not taking on a huge risk because you've got comps right there in the power lines. If you're using a comparable a ways away and making a deduction, you're taking on a lot of risk and you've really got to be prepared for that. And there's going to be a certain population that's just not interested, which will lower your buyer's pool and have less people that can actually buy that property. I've got a video about how to calculate the cost of a flip. If you're looking at doing these power line properties when it comes to a flip, we'll talk about what are the most overlooked costs, some quick formulas for determining those costs, and how to nail down profit numbers as close as you possibly can. Click on the link here to check out that video, how to calculate costs on a flip, and make it a very profitable day.